You're listening to the Stand Up Angler, and my daddy is the host.
All right, well, special thanks to my sweetheart for the introduction, and welcome to the Sustainable Angler, the podcast where we discuss the intersection of fishing, conservation, and sustainability. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. So I'm super excited to share this new 4-part series called The Rise of Sustainability Regulations with special guest James Pollack from Marten Law, where we will take a deep dive into PFAS, extended producer responsibility, and climate regulations that are impacting fishing and outdoor brands all over the country over the next 4 weeks. At Emerger Strategies, I help brands reduce cost, enhance their reputation, and increase customer loyalty by measuring and improving their sustainability performance. But did you know that sustainability can also help your brand mitigate regulatory risks? That's why I'm thrilled to interview James, who is an environmental and regulatory lawyer who helps outdoor gear, apparel, and footwear industries reduce their environmental impact and market sustainability in transparent ways. James counsels trusted national brands on the complicated regulatory and litigation environment surrounding material inputs, emerging contaminants, green marketing claims, and climate impacts. And I'm thrilled to share this special podcast series on the rise of sustainability regulations with y'all. In our first episode in the series, we are tackling PFAS, also known as forever chemicals. And in this episode, James helps define PFAS and their negative human and environmental effects, describes how PFAS regulations will impact fishing and outdoor brands for products like waders, wading boots, rain jackets, even fluorocarbon fishing line, how PFAS has been found in our drinking water, and how brands and retailers can manage chemicals of concern like PFAS and more. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. This episode of The Sustainable Angler is available anywhere you listen to podcasts and is also airing Saturdays at 2 p.m. on Charleston's first and only community-supported radio station, Ohm Radio 96.3 FM. If you like what you're hearing, an absolutely free way to show your support is by leaving it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. This episode of The Sustainable Angler podcast is brought to you by Emerger Strategies and A New Earth Project, the sustainability initiative of Atlantic Packaging.
We set out with a New Earth Project to really start a movement.
It's a global coalition of people who are deeply concerned and want to accelerate the transition away from problematic packaging to more sustainable solutions.
Our entire value proposition was built on helping companies package things better. We were doing sustainability before sustainability was cool. We just called it packaging optimization. And packaging optimization really is about using less. And we built our whole business on that. You know, people send us their products, their goods, and we help them design packaging systems and solutions for the least possible cost, utilizing the least amount of material. Use less is always the right answer.
And that's what I see with companies like a New Earth Project is it's like we're just trying to create solutions for big companies and small, that makes it easier for them, cheaper for them, whatever it is, and then has less impact. Not just trying to tell people you should have less impact and making the choice forced on them. Like, make it better for everybody, and it'll make it better for the whole world.
We see the problem, and we are with you.
Did you know that sustainability isn't just the right thing to do, it's smart business? At Emerger Strategies, we simplify sustainability for small and medium-sized businesses, helping you meet retailer demands, build customer loyalty, and protect the planet. Whether you're navigating retailer sustainability assessments, tackling EPR for packaging requirements, or measuring your carbon footprint, we help you measure and improve your brand's sustainability performance. Our clients in the fishing and outdoor industries are thriving, saving time and money, and growing their businesses, all while reducing their environmental footprint. We've been simplifying sustainable business since 2016, empowering brands like yours to make a real impact without the need to hire, train, and retain a full-time sustainability team. Ready to make sustainability your competitive advantage? Visit emergerstrategies.com to learn how we can help your business profit sustainably. People, I guess, are starting to hear more about PFAS, or at least I have, and to sort of get things kicked off. I really didn't understand what they were until I saw an article in our local newspaper that said PFAS are likely in Charleston Harbor, or confirmed in Charleston Harbor, could affect some of the fish that we're consuming. So that's a very personal example. But that being said, what are PFAS? What does that mean? So anyone reads that headline, they go, okay, well, what is that? What are PFAS? Why are they referred to as forever chemicals?
Yeah, it's a good starting point, but I do think your personal story note, I mean, it's actually a really great place to start as well. I mean, I think people are going to start, if they haven't already, they're going to start hearing about PFAS much more. And the reason is this growth of regulation relating to PFAS. And these regulations lead to two things. It leads to more investigation of where PFAS is in our lived and constructed environment. It also leads to more awareness, more notification around PFAS. So affirmatively telling folks, hey, there's PFAS in this water body, for example. It also leads to more litigation. It leads to more cleanups. It leads to more everything else that comes with having a contaminant in the environment. PFAS it's a really interesting chemistry. We're talking about forever chemicals, and you'll notice there's an S at the end of that description. So this is a family of chemicals is usually the description that's provided. And depending on how you define the family, which the definition itself is a slightly contested thing, different regulators, different scientists will apply a different definition, but it's anywhere from 8,000 chemicals to even 13,000 or 15,000, depending on the particular definition that you apply to the family. And these chemicals are unified by a number of different characteristics. At a basic level, it's a combination of a carbon and a fluorine atom. Sometimes the definition also includes certain other molecular groups or other atomic groups attached to the backbone of the chemical. But that carbon fluorine backbone is really what we're focused on with this family. It's a really strong chemical bond that lends all kinds of interesting properties to the chemistry. And I promise this is about the end of the chemistry discussion for purposes of this podcast. But that chemical bond is so interesting because it's artificial. It's not found in nature. So when we're talking about this chemistry, we're talking about a man-made chemistry that when found in the environment has to be traced to human activity. And the uniqueness of that carbon fluorine bond lends all these characteristics that are super useful in a number of consumer product and industrial applications. It leads to extraordinary heat resistance, water resistance, oil resistance, stain resistance, decreases friction. It's just hearing all of these simultaneous properties, it makes it a really useful chemistry as a family. And it can be used in a number of different ways. So when you're at a factory, you might use it in chemical applications. So trying to spread a chemistry across a surface, it's used in that way. It's a surfactant is the description. It can be used as a lubricant. So you have a machine that you want to decrease the friction on. It can be used on surfaces where there's extreme heat applications. So it's very durable. can be used on those surfaces that hit really high temperatures. Those same descriptions could then be applied to consumer products. So can you think of things that it would be useful to have be super waterproof and also stain proof? Think about carpets, think about clothing, think about raincoats. Can you think of things that would be really helpful to decrease the friction on? Absolutely. You could think about used in bike lubricants or ski wax or all kinds of things that are used in the ways that we enjoy the outdoors. And so this chemistry has been used in all these different ways over the last half century or more. And what we're starting to understand with a growing scientific consensus is that especially these older versions of PFAS that have been really well characterized, those PFAS, they're really bad for us and they're really bad for the environment. You can find PFOA and PFOS, these really old chemistries, all over the world, and they cause any number of medical challenges ranging from diabetes to cancer to reproductive harm. They've been linked to all of those things. And I'm being very careful in the way that I describe it just because it's hard for science to keep up with the chemistry. So when you're talking about a family of chemicals that's so broad, there's research on a chemical by chemical basis. But as the research expands, we have an expanded understanding of the negative effects of these chemistries.
Yeah, and to put it specific to fishing, like I think about waders, wading boots. That's what pops in my head initially. Raincoat, right, or your ski jacket. Those are things where repelling water is a product attribute that makes the product better, right?
Totally.
And why it was used in the first place, right? Is here's a way to repel water off the gear that we're selling.
Yeah. No, and it's especially in these kinds of markets where you're looking to get really technical capabilities from your products. I mean, this is a really advanced chemistry that can lend all kinds of interesting attributes to your products. You could think why do I need simultaneous water and oil resistance? Let's say you're gutting a fish, let's say that, that's exactly the application where you want that kind of simultaneous characteristic. Another example within this realm, fluorocarbon line. You'll notice I started the discussion by talking about the carbon and fluorine bond. Yep. Fluorocarbon. I mean, this is a pretty broad set of uses for this chemistry within the fishing community, and it's the regulation of these chemicals, the changes in the ways that we use or phase out these chemicals. They're going to have broad implications for how we fish. And I really appreciated the way that you started the conversation. Just to go back, your personal story, you saw that there was PFAS in your water. Yep. I wrote a book about PFAS regulation. It's called the PFAS Desk Book. Yep. And while I was writing the book, I received a notification in the mail from my water system telling me that my drinking water had PFAS in it. I mean, you can only imagine what that felt like. We had an infant at the time. We were making formula for him. I mean, this is water is everywhere. It's part of how we live. So PFAS in our waterways has implications for our drinking water. It has implications for the fish. There's now fishing advisories in many states saying that you shouldn't eat the fish, or you have to eat only certain quantities of the fish because the PFAS is being found in the fish tissue. I mean, this has pretty broad ripple effects across the ecosystem. So it's only going to increase in visibility over time.
And this, yeah, right. And this is for me personally, I mean, I think this was like maybe 2 years ago that I saw that headline and was like, what? I was like, it was kind of like, I don't remember the exact headline. It was in Post and Courier, but it was just kind of just like, did you know? And so I started reading into it and I was like, what are like PFAS? Okay, it's a chemical that can't be good. It's a man-made chemical. That's probably not good to ingest. And it was basically, it was more or less a warning statement saying, if you are fishing in Charleston Harbor and harvesting oysters, eating redfish, eating trout, all the things that we love to do, you probably want to go a little bit further out than the harbor because we don't know how safe or unsafe this is. And then on top of that, we got a letter from our water supplier saying something similar. So then we got our water tested. We put on a filter that is supposed to, it's like triple filtered and all this stuff. But anyway, it's like it's seemingly out of nowhere. This has become this huge thing. And then on top of that, like this is like, hey, this is what's happening in your area. It is now certain, and that's, I guess my question is, how are these regulations starting to come about and trickle down to brands or consumers or water suppliers for that matter?
Yeah, so I think I've talked about this on our previous episodes, but I work at an environmental law firm, which is a really cool position to be in for this kind of thing because PFAS didn't first arise from the regulatory or even the litigation front in the product space. It started out as a water story. And for those who are interested in learning more, there's all kinds of popular media now focused on PFAS. There was a recent Mark Ruffalo movie, Dark Waters, looking at one attorney who was investigating contamination in West Virginia in his home community and found a number of health effects of some of these older PFAS that I was describing back in the mid 2000s. And part of why this is coming up now is that there have been a number of regulations at the federal level and at the state level focused on drinking water, because drinking water has become really the focus of human exposure to PFAS. I mean, it makes sense. When you consume water, you're really directly ingesting the chemistry if it's in the water. And human health hazard studies have identified that drinking water is among, if not the primary exposure pathway for PFAS chemicals. So EPA has been on the road toward regulating certain PFAS chemicals in water for quite a while. Like we're talking on the span of decades, where first you do this is going to get kind of into the weeds a little bit, but I think it's a useful thing to talk about. There's the UCMR, which is basically a way for EPA to direct water systems to test for unregulated chemistries, just to understand, like, where is it in the US? Where is it in our water system and at what levels? So UCMR 3 led to a much more robust data set back in the early 2010s about where is PFAS in the community. That led to a broader understanding of just how pervasive this chemistry is in the environment. It turns out when you look for it, it's relatively easy to find it, especially with modern testing technology. That led to regulation at the state level, and then eventually proposed regulation at the federal level, along with another round of testing called UCMR 5 that required, functionally speaking, this isn't exactly correct, but functionally speaking, every public water system in the country to test for certain PFAS. And the results of that are ongoing, but what it led to is this massive data set of understanding where PFAS is in our environment. And it turns out it's in our water supply in many communities, including where I was when I was writing this chapter. That's what led to those test results, I know. And what that means is we have to identify, well, how did it get into our environment? And that leads to investigation of the uses of PFAS historically. One of the primary sources of PFAS is firefighting foam, or AFFF, aqueous film forming foam. This really useful chemistry, which you'll remember I talked about heat resistance and its surfactant qualities. It's good at spreading across the surface. Those exact qualities make it a really good firefighting tool, especially in places like airports and military facilities and industrial sites where there are fuel fires and really high heat fires. The issue is when you test with it, like you practice firefighting or you actually do firefight, or there are accidents where you spill firefighting foam, that PFAS chemistry enters the environment. And that's really where my law firm ended up factoring into this. We represent a number of communities who are impacted by PFAS contamination arising either from military facilities or from airports or from other industrial dischargers. And there's ongoing litigation right where you're sitting in Charleston, South Carolina. That's where all of these different lawsuits, tens of thousands of lawsuits across the country involving public water supplies, are now being fought out in Charleston, South Carolina at the federal courthouse there. And those ongoing disputes are going to make a huge difference for water supplies or for public water systems who are working to clean up their water. But that's not the only source of PFAS contamination in the world. There are other uses for PFAS that we've been talking about. And so the uses of PFAS in consumer products leads to PFAS contamination at landfills, at manufacturing facilities. So there's this growing regulatory focus on, okay, at the back end, we've got all this contamination in our water. Where's it coming from? And that's led a lot of states to figure out, well, how do we turn off the spigot? How do we stop PFAS from entering the economy? Yeah. And one way of doing that is to start regulating the uses of PFAS in consumer products. And that's really where we are today. Is there's a growing number of states, especially really big states, very economically powerful states, important markets like California and New York, who are regulating the use of PFAS in consumer products. And that's changing the way that people make stuff. It's as simple as that.
And what are so from? I didn't realize this was happening at the federal courthouse in Charleston. This makes this even more relevant and crazy.
Oh yeah. No. There's a federal judge in Charleston who specializes in this mechanism. It's called an MDL, multi-district litigation. It's basically a way. It's almost like a reverse class action. So in a class action, you have many different plaintiffs who consolidate into one to then sue an entity. In this case, you have a number of entities that are being sued by different folks in different districts all across the country. Yeah. And this mechanism allows folks to consolidate all those cases for purposes of fighting it out over some core issues. And then those core issues, when they're decided, then get applied to all those cases in their home districts. So he specializes in these MDL mechanisms. So he has these cases, Judge Gergel out in South Carolina.
So how do or what are some of these core things that are common that people are coming and saying, this is what happened to me or in my community?
Yeah, so all of the cases that have been consolidated in South Carolina have a relation to the use of AFFF, this aqueous film forming foam, or this firefighting foam. So if that is the nexus of all of these cases, are alleged contamination relating to the use of AFFF. So all these public water systems who are claiming contamination related to AFFF, individual plaintiffs who are claiming health harms based on AFFF, kind of you name it, as long as that nexus is there, they're a part of the MDL. And so there are a number of different factual and scientific and other types of legal issues that need to be hammered out that are common to all those kinds of claims, like who made AFFF? How did it move through the economy? If you use it, what are the fate and transport of those chemicals? How does it move through the environment? What is the cost of filtering it? What technologies can you use? A lot of those things can be hammered out in that consolidated venue. Then there's all these individual pieces that need to be decided. So, okay, how do then those decisions that are made apply to my particular case in my particular community, wherever that might be? Like, we represent communities here in Washington State, where I sit, that are being litigated in South Carolina as part of this consolidated mechanism. Whatever decisions are made in that consolidated mechanism will then help to simplify whatever process goes on back here in Washington eventually.
Wow. Okay, that's wild. All right, so now let me drill down a little bit more specific to how these PFAS regulations, because I think and EPA is regulating it to some degree, and then you have states that are regulating it, I guess, on how they see fit. But how are these PFAS regulations going to impact brands that are in the fishing industry or fly fishing industry, same industries?
Yeah. So it might be helpful to talk through like what types of regulations are going on right now.
Yeah.
And most of this activity is happening at the state level. So states have, over the last few years, been working to implement regulations of PFAS in consumer products. And what's interesting is that they tend to fall into a number of different buckets. Each one is kind of approaching things differently, but there is sort of the patchwork is becoming a little bit more unified over time. There are bans, and those are just straight up prohibitions. You can't use PFAS as we've defined it in this category of products. And it tends to be sort of this category by category approach. So it'll be, in the case of California, for example, you cannot intentionally add PFAS or have PFAS over or fluorine over a certain level. Starting January 1st, 2025, for textile articles, which then you have to look under the hood at the definition of what is a textile article. It's something made in whole or in part of textiles. So it's pretty broad in its implications there. It's a whole lot of stuff that falls within that definition, including certainly apparel, footwear, things that we use to go fish. You then go to a place like New York, and they have a similar prohibition on the use of PFAS in apparel. And so you have to look at the definition of apparel and what fits within that. And it's a slightly smaller definition than the California one. But those are bans, and that's one category of regulation. Then there are reporting requirements. That's sort of another category. So if you use PFAS, you're certainly welcome to keep doing it. You just have to tell us about it. And there have been historically 2 states that have done this kind of a reporting requirement. There's Minnesota, which is going to start January 1st, 2026. And then there's Maine, which had a very broad reporting requirement, but it's changed quite a bit. So it's a much more limited set of products that will require reporting, and that's been delayed by quite a bit. So for purposes of this discussion, I'd really focus on Minnesota, and that covers every product. It's not just a product category that it covers. And the third category are just blanket bans. Just it covers every product you can imagine and just prohibits the use of PFAS other than extremely limited circumstances, which are known as currently unavoidable uses. And so you have to get basically permission from the state in order to continue the use of PFAS. And for that kind of a blanket ban, there's only 2 states that have that kind of a blanket ban on the books. It's Minnesota and Maine. If I remember correctly, it's 2032 for both of those blanket bans. But other states have been considering these kinds of blanket bans. Like California was actively debating a basically identical ban just last year. I would guess that proposal comes back up again this year, and we'll see if it ends up passing. But this sort of state by state patchwork is what we're seeing in the marketplace. And it becomes really hard for brands to know, well, what products are covered, what aren't, in what states, and when. And that's taken up quite a bit of my time over the last couple of years, is folks working to hit that benchmark and understand, well, how do we phase out this chemistry? How do we communicate it to our supply chain? How do we conduct our due diligence to make sure it's gone? And how do we message our efforts in an effective way that doesn't get us in trouble?
Interesting. And so it kind of reminds me of our episode on extended producer responsibility. Like you just kind of have this different states start to say, hey, here, we want to start enacting this. The rules may be slightly different, but what I see is the commonality. And I know that you cannot give legal advice. This is just a podcast. We're having a discussion. But if it were me, and I'm not a brand, but if it were me, I would find the most stringent one and apply it across all my products and say, this way we're covered. As more of these things come online, I'd rather just be prepared. So as a brand or a manufacturer, or whatever you want to call it, but let's just say brand. As a brand, you mentioned are there steps that brands should take to, I would assume, do an inventory of sorts of saying, we need to understand the chemical makeup of our products. Do any of these have carbon, fluorocarbon, PFAS family? And if so, to what degree, and how do we work with our suppliers to get it out? And also, what are the alternatives? How can I provide a product that meets the same functionality that doesn't have this man-made chemical that has human health and environmental health related problems?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a big undertaking, and what you've outlined are a lot of the steps that folks have been and will continue to be going through. And I mean, it's really interesting working with folks in this space, and there have been a number of brands that have been really outspoken about their work in this. I think if folks are interested in learning more about how a brand could go about this, just because they have so much stuff out there. Keen, the footwear brand, okay, they've got essentially a green paper that's all public, talking about their journey to phase out PFAS over the course of, I think it was like a decade. They were ahead of the game. They sort of beat the regulations by quite a bit. But what's interesting about the story that they tell, and I don't think it's dissimilar to other brands going through this exact experience, is, the first step that they did is they looked at the uses of the chemistry in their supply chain and asked the question, well, do we even need PFAS to be, do we need a DWR? Do we need some sort of water resistance in this application to begin with? And when you look at something like a wading sandal, or it's it's going to get wet. You don't need.
It's already got the holes in it.
Yeah, it's got holes in it. It's going to get wet. The water's going to flow through it. It's going to dry off. You're not trying to prevent it from getting wet. You're dunking it in the water.
Yeah.
So that first cut of, well, is it needed here? That eliminated quite a bit of their reliance just right off the top. And that kind of thoughtfulness in design, it's a useful starting place because you don't lose anything. Then when you start getting to the other pieces of it, it's education, certainly with your supply chain, and suppliers are getting much more familiar with this discussion because other brands are doing this. It's just part of the regulatory environment at this point. So you'll hear things like, hey, I need to switch DWRs to something that doesn't have PFAS, and they'll say like, oh, yeah, C0, or they'll say PFAS free, or, whatever the descriptors. The question is, well, so what is it being replaced with, and is it actually not containing PFAS? And that may require some level of due diligence of asking the questions like, what is this replacement? What family of chemistry does it fall into? Are we making a regrettable substitution here? Are we like it's interesting because this whole experience leads to the introduction of really fundamental green chemistry questions. And those things are embedded into the laws. The California law, for example, requires that folks replace it with the least toxic alternative. And so there's a component to this that requires some level of investigation and understanding and seeing, well, what are these alternatives and what are their health effects and how do we approach this? But this isn't the first time that we've had to go through this. I mean, this is a chemistry story that's as old as chemistry. It's
I think we've talked about this before, maybe on one of the other episodes or a side conversation, but I spent a few years in the green building world, and so chemicals of concern, red list materials, these things, it is just standard operating procedure. Like what chemicals are in our products? We need to know this. We need to define this list. Compare that to, okay, do they fall in any of these categories, or are these families or any of this? And if they are, we need to be transparent with our customers about it to say this is what is in our product. And also, where in the case of PFAS, we need to eliminate this or find the least toxic alternative. What does that look like? And I think all of this, the more I have talked to you about it, but also working with my clients, whether it is, hey, we're having to contact our supply chain about their energy usage for greenhouse gas emissions, whether it is we've got to contact our packaging suppliers to see what more sustainable packaging solutions they have. Chemical. It's all the same thing, right? It's all about being thoughtful and more mindful about, instead of just saying, hey, here's a solution that's going to repel water. Great. Throw it on the waiters. It's, hey, well, hang on. What's in it? What is this? And I think ultimately that's a good thing.
Yeah. No, and I think it's these kinds of regulations, the challenge with applying them is that it turns out the supply chain or the value chain, or however you would describe it, is really complex and involves a lot of folks who may not have all the information needed to really make an informed decision. Like supply chains are set up basically to break down. They're built for mystery. They're built to silo information. They're built to prevent the flow of data that would be useful to comply with something like this. And so at the state level, states are struggling to figure out who do we enforce against, like who actually is responsible for these kinds of things. At the retailer level, they're trying to understand, well, what the heck is on our shelves and how do we deal with this stuff? Because we certainly don't know what's in the products. They're not our products. We're just selling them. And then at the brand level, they're asking the same questions. Well, we told them to use these materials, but we certainly didn't talk about PFAS chemicals or tell them to add that. How do we learn more about that? And at the factory level, it's exactly the same story, and it keeps going. And so with these kinds of sustainability regulations, one of the real keys here is just communication. It's just figuring out, what do we know, what don't we know, and how do we figure it out? And there are different tools in your toolkit, whether it's contract or whether it's testing or whether it's as simple as a letter. But you have to think about deploying that toolkit and how to effectively do it and every brand is in a slightly different position with their suppliers. So you have to think through those different options that you have available and see what works best for you.
Are there any? You mentioned a couple of chemicals, or are there any like how are some of these other brands addressing this right now?
Yeah, so this is part of the challenge here is different folks are in different positions. They have different levels of resources, but they have to comply with the same set of laws. It's just this is the marketplace that's been set up. And when we're talking about markets as large as California or New York, it's hard to ignore. I think there are some public resources that are useful and are worth reviewing to see what other folks are doing. I mentioned the Keen Green paper, I think is what they call it, the green paper. But if you just type in Keen PFAS paper, they've got a public resource that includes a number of different documents in them that they used with their own suppliers and sort of their testing protocols that they utilized, and even provide contact information for labs. Another public resource would be a firm, AFIRM. They're a chemical management consortium that puts together a restricted substance list, or an RSL, that basically helps communicate restrictions on chemistry use in products. They not only have, I think, a really excellent RSL because it's materials based. So it says, if you're using this material, these are the chemistries that you should be aware of that are regulated in not just the United States, but in other countries. So it's a really useful resource to start from. They also provided a public PFAS compliance policy paper that provides some useful places also to start as far as how to implement your own sort of compliance mechanisms. I think the challenge with these resources, though, is really an issue of scale. I mean, folks who are really those small brands that are functioning in the way that you're describing, it's really hard for them to get a handle on exactly what is going on in the marketplace and how do we implement these kinds of requirements. Some folks need to, lean on the suppliers. If you are in that kind of position, you may have a really close relationship with your supplier because you're so reliant on them to provide you with things. It's worth talking to them about what they're doing for other folks. There are the folks who are applying this chemistry. For one thing, they're the folks who are most affected by the use of this chemistry. I mean, that's where the chemistry is being mass collected and applied in a workplace. They're really feeling the brunt of this environmental burden. And so talking to them about this chemistry, about the phase out, about alternatives, they're probably doing this stuff already for other customers. And so having those kinds of conversations is a useful place to start, as silly and simple as that sounds. But it really is a useful place to begin the conversation.
Well, and I think that's probably the most useful, right? Is the getting started, as you're going, okay, well, how do we tackle this? So I think that's super helpful info for anyone out there, and I'll put links to all this stuff so you can use it as a reference. But that's great advice. Not legal advice. That's just great.
Just tangible, tangible, non-legal advice.
Yeah, there you go. I like it. All right, so here's a question that I have. So we kind of been talking about brands and manufacturers. How does this affect a retailer who's selling the products of someone who has PFAS or may not have PFAS?
Yeah, so this affects retailers in a number of different ways. At one level, it restricts where you can sell things. So if you have PFAS containing inventory, the law in California says that one cannot sell or offer for sale in California products that contain PFAS. So from an enforcement perspective, you would want to be careful about what you're selling into California. That's one level, and that leads to all kinds of questions about inventory management, understanding what's on your shelves, understanding what's in the things on your shelves, and how you're going to approach things like e-commerce, or if you're physical, the stuff that's on your shelves. And there are all kinds of small retailers in California who have very publicly voiced the challenges with meeting the deadline on January 1st, 2025, and how exactly to do that. It is a real challenge, and there are no straightforward solutions that I can just provide on a podcast.
Yep.
So that's one category of effects. The other category of effects is maybe slightly a bank shot, it feels like, but it really does impact the retailers. It's going to change the type of stuff that you're able to get. There are going to be changes in the marketplace that you may have noticed this last buying cycle already, or maybe have not connected the dots. Like, there have been changes to formulations of products. There's been changes to branding. There's been changes to marketing, changes in the promises about the performance of products. And those relate to changes in chemistry. So we talked about how useful this chemistry is as a simultaneous oil and water resistant chemistry. Replacement chemistries are not nearly as good at doing both. So there's going to be changes in the way that the technical capabilities of the product are communicated. But the other piece of it that's going to change in communication is care instructions are going to become so much more important. People are going to have to take care of their products in a way that they have not had to up to this point. And, replacement DWRs, durable water repellents, they tend to require much more cleaning, getting rid of stains, getting rid of oil stains, because that oil stain then leads to permeability of the fabric, and then it leads to getting wet, essentially. So you need to clean it. You need to actually put it into the dryer in some cases, and each DWR replacement requires slightly different things. So as retailers, the people, specialty retailers especially, who are sort of the first line of defense on these kinds of products, they're the people talking through, like, use this one instead of this one, or I use this thing. They're going to be the sort of first line on this stuff. And so understanding how folks should take care of the product, it'll lead to happier customers. It'll lead to better outcomes for folks. And so talking to dealers, talking to sales reps about, well, what do I need to know about this new DWR that's being sold, or what do I need to know about this new type of product that's being sold? I think that's going to be a really useful conversation for folks, and will pay dividends down the road.
Well, I think that is really, really good advice for anyone listening. I think it has to do with, I can't help but draw these comparisons because this is the world that I live in sustainability. But it just seems like the further we're getting away from nature, the more complicated things are getting, and the bigger these problems are becoming. And I think it's something that I think about. It's like, in theory, right? There's nothing wrong with discovering a chemical that could benefit humanity, right? The problem is that over time, when you discover that there are huge health and environmental implications for this, and that when you do it at a scale of 8 billion people, we really start to run into some problems. So hence the regulations. So I think that this is really useful information from you, James, and I think that's probably a pretty decent note to wrap on in lieu of time. But before we do that, is there Any advice or last words you'd give to any brands or manufacturers out there, and where could they get more information to get in touch with you, James, if they have questions about PFAS?
Yeah, I mean, I think my last note is just it's a theme that I think we've talked about on these previous podcasts and will continue to emphasize going forward. Really understanding your products, it's going to pay dividends down the road, and creating those relationships, those strong relationships with your supply chain. It's just so useful, because at the end of the day, you need to know what's going into your stuff in order to report it, in order to comply with bans, in order to, fill in the blank regulatory requirement. And so really working to strengthen those relationships, clarify the content of your products. It's a change in the marketplace. It's the change in how folks have operated up to this point. You could just place orders and things would appear, and then you could sell them, and it was great.
Yep.
But the future is really understanding what's going into your product and understanding the impact on the environment and on human health. And there's a premium for that. It will pay dividends. It's just, it takes a lot more work. So that's really one of the big takeaways, I would say, from this discussion.
Yep, I think that's super solid. All right, James, I'm a brand. I've listened to this podcast. I'm freaked out. I got to get in touch with you. How do I do that?
You can find me on the old Google machine at James Pollack. That's Pollack. I'm at Marten Law. That's MartenLaw. Always happy to chat with folks, and feel free to reach out either by phone or by email.
Awesome. All right. Well, special thanks to James Pollack for all he does to protect what we all love. And stay tuned for next week's episode, where James and I take a deep dive into extended producer responsibility. If you enjoyed this episode, an absolutely free way to show your support is by leaving it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. It's a chance to tell me what you love about the show, and it helps others discover it too. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for new episodes coming soon.